It's time now for Talk of the Bay on K-Squid Radio, your local community radio station for the Monterey Bay. I'm your host, Rachel Ann Goodman, and it's my pleasure to welcome to the studio microphones my colleague in Talk of the Bayland, PK Hattis, also of the Sentinel. Welcome, PK.
Hey, Rachel. Good to be with you.
And we've got on the line a former Senate member, Bill Monning, and welcome to the show.
Good afternoon, good evening. I hope I'm coming through loud and clear.
You are. As soon as I turn down that theme music, there we go. So what a crazy night, huh? Election night used to be where you'd get the results. But here we are with 58% of the voters having weighed in yet and been counted. It's the counting process that we're all waiting for on the governor's race. Let's start there, and then we'll move along to our local county races and local city races. And Bill, hopefully you'll have some results for Monterey County as well, at least the most contested seats and the ones that, maybe have meaning for us all as far as going forward. So let's start out with you, Bill. What were you watching for, and what are you still wondering about when it comes to this rather chaotic, I would say, confusing at times for voters, governor's race?
Yes, well, as you know, we moved to the top two runoff after a statewide ballot initiative.
Sorry, Bill, I'm still working on your audio. There was some echo there. Let's try that again. How's that?
Do I need to do anything at this second?
Just talk louder, I guess.
Okay. Well, I was just mentioning that California moved to the top two runoff.
There we go.
In a ballot measure in 2010 that got rid of party primaries. So most of the time, the top two has featured a Republican and Democrat in most districts, but some heavily Democratic, some heavily Republican districts at the Assembly and Senate level have had top two runoffs between two Democrats, two Republicans. One of the big critiques of the top two runoff is that it eliminates minor parties, third parties, Green Party, Libertarian, from having candidates in the runoffs. So this year was really the first time we saw in a statewide governor's race that the top two runoff really created a lot of confusion. And part of the reason for that was, I think, over 60 candidates ran for governor, but serious contenders, there were a lot of Democrats, as many as 10 or 12 early on. A few dropped out, but we went into the primary with at least 6 serious Democrats and only 2 serious Republicans. So some speculation feared there could be a top two runoff of 2 Republicans, both MAGA Republicans, in a state that's predominantly, overwhelmingly registered Democrat or independent.
Right, and it doesn't look like that's going to happen as of right now.
It doesn't, but now we've flipped to the other possibility. Could it be 2 Democrats? Could it be Javier Becerra and Tom Steyer? Well, Tom Steyer's running kind of a distant third now from the results as of today. But there's, as you pointed out, Rachel, there's still a lot of outstanding ballots. In fact, more haven't been counted than have been counted. So people say, why is that? President Trump says it's evidence of fraud in California. To the contrary, we take a lot of time to count all these ballots to make sure every ballot is counted. And when so many come in at the last minute, as they did on June 2nd, the counting doesn't even start in some cases until June 3rd, June 4th. It'll play out over the next week or 10 days. But I do think the results that we have as of today offer some pretty significant trends, with Hilton leading, the Republican, at 27%, Javier Becerra around 25%, and then Steyer just under 20%. That's percent of the votes counted to date. So is there a likelihood that Steyer could pass Hilton? He'd need almost 8-9 points to catch Steyer. We don't know where all those votes are, what the trends might be in those uncounted districts and votes, but I think we are pretty much assured that it will be a Democrat and a Republican, or 2 Democrats.
Right. And, how this race shaped it out, a lot of people were pleading with the other candidates who had 2, 3, even 5% to drop out and endorse one of the top people. And they didn't do that. And Bill, I was wondering, and then I want to go to PK, about your guess about why, when it looked pretty darn difficult for Katie Porter to make any ground, or Villaraigosa, or even the fairly well-known people like Matt Mahan, who was accused of having lots of Silicon Valley billionaire money, those people stayed in the race. They really didn't drop or endorse. And I wonder about, Bill, what your thoughts about why?
Well, I can only conclude that it's self-interest and ego. I would include in that list Betty Yee, who did drop out and gave her support to Tom Steyer. But Betty Yee was one of the first ones in. She'd held 2 statewide offices, both treasurer and controller, a seasoned policy wonk, but didn't get traction, and she got out and gave her support to Tom Steyer. As you pointed out, Katie Porter ended up with 4.5% of the vote, Mahan less, 4.1%. I cannot answer why they stayed in, other than feeling I have a right to stay in and I'm going to stay in, but I don't think it showed much loyalty to the Democratic Party in terms of trying to guarantee Democratic Party success on Election Day.
And PK, what's your thought on the same question, or tangential question, of the dynamics of this particular race?
Yeah, I would agree with much of what Bill said. It's kind of inexplicable for many reasons. I mean, there's 62 names for the governor's race on the ballot this year, and maybe they, these candidates that were polling much lower sort of gambled and said, hey, I'll stick it out in the race, and I'm not going to win, but I can still sort of get some attention and maybe be thinking some years ahead, and gamble with what Bill talked about who's going to end up in the top 2. But it is, who knows? It's hard to get in the minds and hearts of these candidates, but,
Well, and let's not forget the role this governor is going to have to play when they do get elected. Assuming the MAGA crowd is still gunning for California, or, in particular Trump, all of the money that we're owed is astronomical now if you count FEMA. And, our county alone is running a huge deficit, and it's mostly because of backlogged, unpaid things that we are owed. Yeah. Medicaid.
What we're owed, and also cuts in the so-called big, bad, beautiful, ugly bill that cuts to Medicaid, cuts to food stamps. I mean, these hits are being felt right now, particularly in low-income communities. I just point out one other issue on the governor's race. When Swalwell was accused of his sexual assaults on women, and he first dropped out of the governor's race, then he resigned his congressional seat. That's when Javier Becerra saw a huge uplift in his campaign. But Swalwell still got over 10,000 votes on Election Day, and I'm sure there's still more to be counted. That's kind of curious. There was another candidate among the 62 named Barack Obama Shaw.
I saw that.
And he got over 1,000 votes from Alameda.
People, you're throwing away your vote.
brings out all kinds,
Yeah.
and people spend their vote in different ways.
Right, exactly. So that's the governor's race, and we won't know, what do you think, for PK, maybe a week or more, the actual winners?
Gosh, I'm so plugged into the local scene here in Santa Cruz County, so I can't say for sure, but like Bill said, it's 58% of the vote, I think, has been counted statewide. There's a lot of votes that still need to be counted, and the race may change. I think the Steyer camp is, hanging in there and still hasn't conceded to anything. They think perhaps they could end up in the top 2 if things really break their way. And, I think there's again, I'm not, paying the closest attention to the statewide politics, but I think there is somewhat of a case to be made, right? I mean, a lot of folks were by instruction and by just by their own, will, paying attention to how the governor's race was shaping up, really hung on to their ballots quite long to see who the party was kind of consolidating around. And I'm not so sure it seems like Becerra has become that figure to, at least as of now, but in some of the circles that I've been paying attention to out in the world here in Santa Cruz County and online, some of the politicos, it does seem like a lot of the progressive wing especially have been coalescing around Steyer. So I really do think, and who knows how much of the vote that's still left to count is that progressive wing, but progressives tend to be smart and strategic, and so there's a case to be made perhaps that many of those outstanding votes will go to Steyer, and I'm sure that's what his camp is hoping for, so we'll see.
And Rachel, just a final comment on that. I think it is important to point out that Steyer, a billionaire, spent over $215 million and counting saturated TV with his own pieces and hit pieces against Becerra. And Becerra, 2 weeks prior to Election Day, had raised around $6 million. That almost doubled by Election Day. But totally opposite funding sources, and Becerra leading the count. We're in interesting times. Citizens United continues to allow extraordinary and exorbitant spending in campaigns. And if we could, Rachel, just on the statewide races, one I wanted to just comment on briefly, the treasurer's race, that featured regional local Senator Ana Caballero, who had been first Latina mayor of Salinas, served in the Assembly and the Senate, served in Governor Brown's cabinet. It looks like she's in third place in the top 2 after she announced Eleni Kounalakis, the lieutenant governor, who had been in for the governor's race, pulled out of the governor's race and entered the treasurer's race. She also had millions of dollars behind her, television advertising. She ended up number 1, and a Republican, Jennifer Hawkes, number 2, leaving Ana Caballero apparently in third place and not able to even be in the runoff.
Wow. Yeah. And I was also curious if anybody's tracking the insurance commissioner, which normally is not something we pay that much attention to, but in Santa Cruz County and really all over the state, people are carefully looking at this because of the complete boondoggle of the FAIR plan that people have been forced onto, even when they're not in a forested area. So that's a big one. Yes, the
failure of the FAIR plan and the fires statewide, particularly LA. So as I think you were perhaps going to say, Rachel, the top 2 in the insurance commissioner race are both Democrats, Ben Allen and Jane Kim. Jane leading with 24%, Ben Allen second with 20%. But of all the statewide races at this moment, that's the only statewide executive office that would feature a top 2 runoff between 2 Democrats.
Right, and you want to look at who's funding their campaign. Is it the real estate industry or people who are consumer advocates? So, and often people don't look deeply into that unless they live in the mountains and suffered losses in the fires, which now include a lot of Californians, unfortunately. So we'll be watching that one. It sounds close. And I was going to say, if Tom Steyer was running only in Santa Cruz County, he and Becerra would be neck and neck at this point.
Neck. I was just looking at that. I think Steyer's at 30% and Becerra's at 32%. And so it's tight here in Santa Cruz County. But
everywhere's not like here.
Not everywhere. That we all know this, no. Indeed.
And Bill, I was curious what races you've been watching as a Monterey County resident, and what was particularly contested in your view, and what was at stake in some of these supervisors' races.
So
and
in Monterey County, Monterey County, in the congressional races, both Jimmy Panetta represents in the 19th part of the region, the Central Coast, and Zoe Lofgren the other. They both finished way ahead in their primaries. They will both be required to go into a top two. Both will face a Republican opponent with much fewer votes. A tighter race, or not that tight in the end, but in our Board of Supervisors, there were 2 seats up. One was uncontested. That one featured Chris Lopez, ran unopposed, so he'll return to his 3rd district seat for another 4 years. But the 2nd district featured Glenn Church, the incumbent. This is North Monterey County, Moss Landing, and Ramon Gomez, who serves as a chief of staff for Supervisor Felipe Hernandez in Santa Cruz County. Glenn is leading with 70.9% of the vote. Ramon Gomez with 29% of the vote. So that one looks like Glenn Church will hold his seat and move forward there.
I imagine one of the big issues there is talking about whether or not to site the battery plant, and it sounds like they pulled out after all before this election was concluded. I don't know if they talked about that much, but it was a big issue for a lot of people living in that neighborhood. It
has been the Vistra fire. That was Glenn Church's district. There's been a collateral debate about battery plants in Santa Cruz County, but this district featured northern Monterey County.
Yeah, exactly. PK, did you want to comment on the supervisor's race that you covered from the Watsonville area?
Well, yeah, it's actually a good segue because Felipe Hernandez, as Bill mentioned, is running in the 4th district, and Ramon Gomez is running in Monterey County, formerly or currently serving as sort of the top staffer for Hernandez. I mean, it's a really interesting race. The 4th district is South Santa Cruz County, Pajaro region, city of Watsonville, at least most of it, Interlochen, Corralitos area, or near Corralitos. There's been 3 candidates in that race: Felipe Hernandez, the incumbent, Tony Nunez, and Eli Gonzalez.
Was it Tony a fellow journalist of ours?
Indeed, he was. Up until a few years ago, he was a longtime reporter and editor at Good Times, and I think he was at the Pajaronian for a while as well.
Yeah, he came out of the journalism program at Cabrillo, so we were cheering him on there. Mm-hmm. I'm always interested when people make that leap from journalism to politics because they know what they're getting into, right?
I've been reflecting on that a little bit just as in my own personal life as a journalist, trying to get in Tony's head, at what point did he decide he wanted to be on the other side of the coin, right? He's covered politics and policy for so long. Perhaps this is a follow-up story as the campaign continues, although we don't know if it will. Maybe more on that later. But I'm curious to hear Tony's reflections about when he decided to try to jump in the inner side of policy rather than from the outside, observing.
And what were some of the big issues at stake in that race? I mean, we just mentioned the battery plant in Watsonville, but what are some of the other things that came up when they were in a forum that were particularly notable?
It's hard not to still emphasize, once again, the battery storage issue. I mean, it does feel like that was the issue that the campaign, the axis that the whole campaign revolved around. Because there's a proposed project, battery energy storage project proposed in unincorporated Watsonville area, which is in the 4th district, and a lot of folks still feel extremely unsafe with the project near them.
I think they pulled out. I think they pulled their permit. Isn't that correct?
Technically, yes, but the project is still very much alive. What they did was they pulled their permit or their application with the county itself, and they decided to go with the so-called state route, because the state has its own route for evaluating and approving and permitting battery energy storage projects. And the county doesn't have its own ordinance on those projects yet because the technology is relatively new. And so they were in process of developing that, and the timeline just didn't add up for the developer. They started to a lot of money on the line for them, and they just said, hey, we're going to go the state route. There still will be some opportunity for local discussions and input, but ultimately now it's in the hands of state officials. So we'll see what happens there. Another story.
Another story to follow up on.
Yeah, and Rachel and PK, I think it's important to just point out in that supervisorial race, Tony Nunez is leading with about 49% of the vote, and Felipe, the incumbent, Felipe Hernandez, with 33%. Unlike these statewide races where it's automatic top two regardless of turnout, in these nonpartisan local races, if a candidate gets 50% plus one, they win the seat. So everyone's watching as more votes are counted. If Tony Nunez gets over 50%, he will become supervisor. If he stays at 49% or lower, there would be a runoff between the top two, which would would be Felipe Hernandez and Tony Nunez. And so a lot hangs on that outstanding vote count as to whether this moves to November or gets resolved right now.
Votes do count. I mean, literally, your vote, just one or two votes can shift someone's entire representation in a county like this, where it's a pretty small number of voters. If you look at the number.
Well, thank you for that, Bill. It is really crucial context. Often these races with more than two candidates, they do end up in a runoff. But in this case, Tony is quite close, 49.88%, just to put a fine point on it. And that has kind of been the margin he's been at since results were first released on election night. And so myself and my colleagues and all local reporters here in Santa Cruz County will be really paying close attention for the next, I'd say, at least another week or so to see what happens. Another thing to add here is that so far in the 4th District alone, 4,400 votes have been counted. And I checked back for the last time there was a primary in the 4th District, which was 2022, June, and about 6,500 votes were cast overall. So if you're Tony, you got a couple more thousand votes to count, and you're hoping you can improve on your margin a little bit. And Felipe, I'm sure, is hoping things stay as is, or perhaps those late votes will break his way, and this can go to a runoff in November. And we'll just have to kind of wait and see what happens. And then the last thing I want to mention here is that 6,500 votes is not a lot of votes, and the 4th District includes the city of Watsonville, most of the city of Watsonville, which is, close to 50,000 people. I know there's more than 50,000 residents in the 4th District. So, 6,500 is quite a small figure. And I think that's also important context for us to keep in mind as we, pay attention to elections moving forward.
Well, and paying attention is the trick, isn't it? Because the local media, which you're part of, and we're going to have some more media people come on in just a minute, are doing their best to cover these things. But unless you break through the clutter, people aren't really engaged until the last minute. I heard a lot of people calling me and saying, how are you voting? I haven't even looked at my ballot. Like, oh, okay, maybe I'm rare. I don't want to be rare. I want everyone to be doing this, like thinking about how to vote and why they're voting. So let's hope that the midterms are a little different when it comes to voting turnout. For sure.
Yep, and there are plenty of local, rags or news outlets covering these races here in Santa Cruz County. I work for the Sentinel, but there's Santa Cruz Local. Jesse will be here talking plenty, a reporter for them. We'll be talking plenty about local races. Lookout Santa Cruz. There's the NPR. There's KSQD, of course, which had the city of Santa Cruz, all candidates for the mayoral race there, which was fantastic. And it's out there, and there's plenty of information to soak up. So if you didn't get out there for this primary, pay attention for the November elections.
There is so much at stake.
I would just mention, Rachel and PK, on the supervisors in Santa Cruz. I believe Justin Cummings ran unopposed, similar to Chris Lopez in Monterey County.
That's right.
So if I'm not mistaken, he gets another 4-year term.
Yeah,
indeed. And
he represents where I live and has been very active in the community up in Bonnie Doon, which often gets ignored in, except in election years, but he's been up there a lot, I've noticed. One last question, and Bill Monning, before I let you go, and PK Hattis, how did the national tone, everything that's going on, which is a lot, and a lot of the news media is very focused on, the slush fund, the the vote to stop the war, how did those issues, even though, our supervisors don't get to vote on those things, how much did those enter into the discussion, or how much did people feel like they needed to take a stand on things that maybe they didn't have control over as elected?
I think the general national climate has probably inspired a lot of people to get more involved, even at the local level. Where it plays out in California would be in the congressional races, and people ask, will the current Trump administration interfere with the interim elections in November? They already started interfering with the gerrymandering, the Supreme Court decision eviscerating the Voting Rights Act. We created California 5. We did our redistricting in reaction to Texas, and some of those races we're watching to see how they play out. Changed districts that could now favor a Democrat. We know one of them, the 6th congressional district, Dr. Richard Pan, a Democrat, appears to finish in 3rd behind an independent incumbent, Kiley, and a Republican. So that will not play out if the vote stays similar, the percentages, to flip a prior Republican seat to a Democrat. But I think that's where it coalesces California and local voting, how it'll impact national elections in light of all these horrendous scandals that get worse every day.
Absolutely. And PK, one last final word, and we're going to switch gears here.
It's worth mentioning that the 4th District is home to a very large immigrant community, and that was also, you asked about the issues that came up. Public safety was a big issue throughout the campaign. Felipe Hernandez, as a member of the Board of Supervisors, was part of the SHIELD subcommittee that the board created to try to find ways to protect the local immigrant community and their access to resources amid the ongoing Trump administration sort of crackdown and the threat of ICE raids here. So yeah, that was something folks were paying attention to and asking the candidates about quite a bit throughout the campaign.
And we'll continue to do. Well, Bill Monning, thank you so much for being our guest here on Talk of the Bay. Really appreciate your time, and we'll check back in with you again in a month or two and see how things are going in your camp.
Great. Thank you, Rachel and PK.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you, K-Squid.
Thank you. And PK, thanks for dropping in. PK also hosts Talk of the Bay Wednesdays.
Oh, yeah.
I should know
Wednesdays at 5.
All right, tune in. What do you got coming up next Wednesday?
I will be off next Wednesday. As it turns out, I'll be taking a bit of time off, but we'll have something in the works. Everybody keep it close here. We'll surprise you.
Stay tuned, as they say. Thanks for dropping by.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
This is K-Squid Radio. I'm Rachel Ann Goodman, and in just a moment, we'll be joined by Tony Russomanno and Jesse Kathan, reporter for Santa Cruz Local. Stay with us. We're going to keep talking election 2026.
Have you ever asked yourself, what does being healthy mean really? Is it the absence of disease or a state of optimal function? How can I decide which treatment to choose when presented with a variety of options? How do I maximize my healthy lifespan? You can get answers to these questions and more at Ask Dr. Don here on KSQD every Thursday night at 6 p.m.
KSQD thanks the Resource Center for Nonviolence for their support. RCNV celebrates 50 years of creating beloved community through education, events, and local action. Their 50th anniversary celebration is Saturday, November 7th. Tickets and information about renting their event space at rcnv.org. Thank you, Resource Center for Nonviolence, for supporting community radio. K-Squid.
And thank you for listening to K-Squid. We have so many good programs here, it's hard to pick one. But Friday at 5 on Be Bold America, that's tomorrow, Jill Cody welcomes Allison T. Butler to examine how women are centered, silenced, and maligned in popular culture. They explore a generational legacy of media harming women and unpack what it means when women are cast as, quote, problematic. They take a close look at the sensationalized and distorted coverage of Britney Spears, Anita Hill, and Monica Lewinsky, among others. That's Be Bold America at 5 right here on K-Squid. And I'm here with Jesse Kathan. Jesse is a reporter with Santa Cruz Local, an online news service that delves into local politics. Welcome, Jesse.
Hi, Rachel. Thanks for having me.
Wait, say that again.
Hi, Rachel. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're absolutely welcome. And Tony Russomanno is with us. Hi, Tony.
Hey, Rachel. How's it going?
Good. Tony is our reporter at large. He's not too large. He's just the right size. And he pays attention to local politics a lot. He is a retired television reporter for many, many years here and over the hill. And he is generous enough to spend some of his time with us here at K-Squid. So I want to start out by talking about Santa Cruz elections. First, let's talk, Tony, about the judge race, which is rather strange because we don't have races for judge very often in this county. Tell us, first of all, how rare is it? Doesn't the governor usually do that for us?
There are some judgeship races that do get on the ballot, but the most interesting thing about this particular race, I think, is how unexpected the results are when you look at the results in light of experience and advertising and visibility of the candidates. The candidates are Alicia Thomas and Brian Hackett. Now, Brian Hackett has an extensive background in the law. He was the attorney for some of the top Occupy defendants in that trial from about 10 years ago or so. Remember the folks that occupied the vacant bank building downtown Santa Cruz. And he was running a well-funded campaign, very visible campaign, against Alicia Thomas, who declined to do interviews, was essentially missing in action, aside from one or two interviews that she did with a couple of some of our local outlets, but really didn't put much time into the campaign from all appearances. Nor does she have very much, if any, experience as a judge or working in the legal system in front of a judge. Nevertheless, she is currently very far in the lead with 54% of the vote to Brian Hackett's 45%. Now, this doesn't mean that the election is over, of course, because only a very few number of ballots have been counted so far. In fact, this is only the second ballot dump since election night, rather, or in fact, I guess the day after election, early in the morning, was the first real dump.
Around 19,000 votes have been cast for Thomas. I'm looking here, and 15,800 some odd for Hackett. So I'm sure they're still counting a lot of them.
Oh, of course.
But the number is vastly different from what we just heard about a supervisor's race in which 6,000 people had voted so far. So it's still being counted. So it could flip, but again, when you're almost 10 points apart, statistically, it becomes less possible as the votes come in, right?
Yeah. Well, and a large number of people simply did not vote for in that race. It's called an undervote when somebody just skips the race. If they don't know the candidates or they haven't researched it at all, they're likely to move on, which I suppose is better than just casting a vote blindly. In fact, there were 8,500 undervotes compared to, as you said, Brian got close to 1,800 and Alicia Thomas got a little more than 2,100 votes. I'm sorry, 21,000 votes to Brian's about 18,000 votes, and again with 8,500 undervotes.
That's a very large number of undervotes, isn't it? People just
yeah.
didn't know what to do or how to make of it, so they didn't. Jesse, did you cover this at all, this one?
No, we didn't get that deep into the judge race, but in retrospect, I wish we had because, I was similarly very surprised at this. And
I was too, because I had the same experience on Talk of the Bay where I tried 3 or 4 different ways to invite Alicia Thomas onto the show with her opponent, Brian Hackett, who had been booked. And I said, your opponent's coming on. Don't you want to be here with him to counter anything he says? And she never called back, never wrote back. So
the question is, I guess, how did this happen? Why did it happen? And the candidate believes, and I hear this from 2 different sources who have worked with the candidate, Brian Hackett, believes that it came down to the fact that Alicia Thomas is a woman and a large number of voters are women, and the issue also is immigration. And Alicia Thomas is active in the immigration corridor. So she did get substantial number of votes apparently from people who looked at her history and her background and saw that she has been active as an immigration activist.
Right. Okay. So that's maybe an explanation, but we'll never know unless we, did a poll of all the voters and what they were thinking. But on a very unscientific poll, I'm in a chat room with 15 people talking about the election before people voted, and at least 2 of them popped up and said, "I'm voting because she speaks Spanish." I thought that's kind of thin. But anyone could speak another language. It doesn't say anything about their judicial record or their record as an attorney. But I can see why being bilingual is helpful.
Well, if you have no record as an attorney or as a judge, I suppose you wouldn't want to say that, right, in public, which may explain why she kept such a low profile.
Well, we'll find out, won't we? We'll get to hopefully interview her after. If she does indeed get elected, we'll get some time. A judge, it doesn't come around as often as you might think. Usually the governor is the one that appoints. So Kathan is here. Sorry, Jesse. Tell me about some of the local races. The mayoral race got a lot of attention. And Tony, I can tell you're an analog guy because you're shuffling papers.
Sorry. Well,
okay.
Because I had to go back and forth to the county website, Votes Count, and once the 4 o'clock dump came out, the previous dump disappeared. So I had to make sure I printed it out before I got the 4 o'clock.
No problem. We're analog here sometimes too, so no problems. And thanks for being here with us in the second half hour of the program. Jesse, you covered the mayoral race. What were some of the dynamics? There were 5 people running.
Right. Yeah, it was very interesting. And earlier in the program, Bill and PK were talking about this with regard to the supervisor, the 4th district supervisor race. But unlike the state races, it's not so much a race to see, who are the top 2 that are going to go face off in November. It's partially that. But even more so, in both of those races, it's will there be a runoff? Is there going to be another contest in November? Because for these local races, if one candidate gets more than 50% of the vote, they just win outright, and it doesn't move forward to the November general election. And so in this race, in the mayoral race, you had Ryan Coonerty, who's a really long-time politico here, previous tenure on city council, as mayor, as county supervisor, and he came into the race with the unanimous endorsement of the city council, a lot of institutional heft behind him, a lot of support. And soon after that, you had, and he was the first candidate to the race. Soon after that, you had these 4 other candidates pop up, and almost in unison. And 3 of them, and that's Amy Chen Mills, Joy Schendeldecker, and Chris Crone, basically, not that they all have the same platform, they all have, varying beliefs, but they're all more in this progressive sphere where they basically ran a campaign of one of the, taglines, maybe not directly associated, but with their supporters, is anyone but Coonerty, where they just wanted to draw away votes from the front runner and let's make sure that he stays below 50%, and whichever of us, gets the most votes will move on to November. And so that is really on the head of a pin right now, or knife's edge, whatever you want to say. It's 50.27% for Ryan Coonerty. So as of right now, he could avoid a runoff, but as we've been saying, these things are very malleable this early in the counting. So he could very well go to a runoff, and that would likely be against the next highest vote getter right now is Amy Chen Mills, and she has 18.5% of the vote right now.
So a runoff between a candidate who got almost 3 times, well, not quite, but got almost 51%.
Right.
Not quite. And 18%, that's pretty skewed, isn't it?
Yeah. I think it's interesting because I do think a lot of those people that voted for Joy or for Chris or for the other candidate, Jillian Greedsite, I think the assumption is they would switch their votes to Amy in the event of a runoff. I can't speak to how much that would actually happen, but that's the thought.
What was the tenor of the race, and what was at stake? What were some of the top issues people were discussing amongst these forums that you thought stood out?
Yeah. Well, at Santa Cruz Local, when we were developing our voter guide, first we go out and we do a survey. We do listening groups to try to see what are the issues that people are most concerned about. And we do this every election cycle. And without fail, the top two are housing and homelessness, which I'm sure is no surprise to anyone. And these candidates had really different ideas about those things. In general, the way I would characterize the tenor of the race is, I guess the framing that people other than Ryan were saying is that this is an institutional candidate that represents, the existing status quo, the political machine, however you want to put it. And, things are going to run smoothly, but it's going to run according to, without the vigorous debate that this more progressive sector thinks is needed to be to reignite in local politics. So you had those candidates saying, hey, we need more ideas, we need more open debate in city council. And then by contrast, you had, Ryan Coonerty saying, I have this really strong record. I have these really developed ideas about what I'm going to do. And I have, all this support behind me. And it was certainly a really interesting race to follow through all of that.
And there's this whole, aura over it of what does the mayor actually do? Because it sounds like such an important position, and yet a lot of people don't really know it's not like the all supreme leader mayor. Right. It's kind of one of the many city council people, right? But what are the things they can do that city council members cannot do?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. There are cities in which the mayor has more of an executive role. That's not the case for us, but the mayor also is slightly more powerful than he used to be. I'm forgetting now what year this happened, but fairly recently when we switched to, when the city switched to district elections, it also created a separate mayor role. Previous to that, the mayor was essentially appointed. It was a member of city council, and it was basically rotating year by year. So it was, more so a title. Now we have a separately elected at-large. That means everyone in the city is voting for them. An at-large mayor that stays mayor for 4 years. So that is a little bit more power, at least in terms of having, a bully pulpit, in terms of getting to set out an agenda and saying, I have this mandate. People voted for me to be mayor. But yeah, in general, the seat is, one of, the city council. And I would say the major power is deciding alongside with city staff what goes on the city council agenda and when. That's kind of like a wonkish thing that most people may not, be tracking week by week, but there can be behind the scenes stuff where, one council member says, hey, I have this idea, I really want to talk about it. And so that can be a big side of power potentially. But yeah, it's not the president, it's not the governor. It's a little bit less than that.
Right, and that's good for people to know. And that's what I love about Santa Cruz Local is they demystify some of the civics part of our working government that people might not know. And the Santa Cruz City Council has often made it into national headlines, for their contentious debates, their debates over things, they really have no control over. That was a criticism a while back. Seems like they veered away from some of those headline-grabbing contentiousness because maybe the mayor has become like more of an anchor to keep it civil. I don't know, but that was something that used to happen a lot, I know, on the council where they had to clear the room because everyone was yelling.
Right.
So.
I mean, it's really interesting. I've only been in town for, 4 years or so, but, in my reporting, I'm looking back a lot, and the council does have somewhat of a history of speaking out about taking positions on international things, about climate-related things, about things,
We're an anti-nuclear zone. Did you
an
know that?
anti-nuclear zone. Yeah,
I feel
no.
so safe.
I feel incredibly safe because of that. Yeah, because, we're a place that attracts idealists and environmentalists and things like that, people with very strong ideals, even if they're not connected directly to municipal politics. But yeah, as you're alluding to, in around 2018, 2019, you had this, let's say, like, more divided council where you had this very, what they would self-describe as like a progressive wing, right? And then you had these more moderate voices. And I guess the vibe, as you would say, was not good. And there were, allegations of, bad decorum. There was a recall that eventually occurred. And then since then, you have had, 2 council members were replaced, and we had a new district system, a new mayor, Fred Keeley came on. And since that time, things have been a lot smoother, which I think for a lot of people was a relief. But then you do hear rumblings, like I said, from this, progressive side of like, maybe we do need just a little bit more friction. Maybe we do need just a little bit more open debate so that, this isn't just the wheels of power turning,
Yeah, good point. Yeah, that is something that's definitely been discussed. Tony, do you want to chime in here? Tony Russomanno is with us.
Hey, Rachel. Yes, while you folks were chatting it up, I was busily practicing my arithmetic skills, and I've been adding up the percentages of votes received and counted so far for the candidates for Santa Cruz mayor. And if you look at it right now, if you assume that Ryan Coonerty doesn't quite hit the 50% plus 1 vote mark, and he's just barely above that threshold right now, and that this race does go into a runoff, if you take the votes currently of the second place candidate, Amy Chen Mills, and add in all the other votes from the other 3 candidates, Joy, Jillian, and Chris Crone, you come up with 49.98% of the vote right now would be the candidates other than Ryan Coonerty. So it's been pretty much an open secret, I don't know, not much of a secret, that the intent of having these 4 candidates run against Ryan was to siphon off some votes from that would otherwise go to Ryan, to force a runoff election, and then bring these 4 candidates together, coalesce them, and hopefully bring all of their supporters in to vote for Amy in this case, because she would be the second place finisher, and more to the point, against Ryan Coonerty. This was a plan that was discussed openly, and of course, there's no guarantee that any of the 4 candidates will perform this sort of mass action, or that the voters would go along with it. But look at it that way. If that was the original plan, that might work.
Right, and I think what you're saying is that people don't go in lockstep, and voters don't behave exactly as you think they will, as we've seen in quite a few elections, that the turnout being quite low in general for this election when it seemed like a lot was at stake. One thing we haven't mentioned at all is Jimmy Panetta's race, which shouldn't really warrant a lot of discussion because he's an incumbent and he's in a safe district. But there was, for a little-known guy named Sean Doherty, there was a sizable vote. And if you count that alongside the Republican votes, there's a good group of people in this area that were not on board, especially with his Gaza, approach and getting AIPAC money.
Yeah, he did pick up quite a bit of opposition based on his position on Gaza, on Israel, and also his support for the military. And peace groups were pointing out that Panetta voted with President voted. How can I put this? Panetta voted more in the Republican camp than any other Democrat in Congress. When other Democrats were voting maybe 1%, 2%. In concert with the Republican majority, Panetta was up around 12, 13%, perhaps more. In Santa Cruz, we have Sean Dougherty with 13% of the vote and Jimmy Panetta at 64%. So that's not enough to get to a runoff, but it does show that there was some substantial support or opposition, at least, to Jimmy Panetta. And also, Rachel, the turnout is slightly above what the turnout was in the last gubernatorial election the last gubernatorial primary in California. Not by much, but just slightly above right now.
What is it, like 14? It wasn't very high in general, either one. Can you remember what the two?
Boy.
Sorry.
Yeah, I have it. I'm going to shuffle through papers.
Okay.
I have it written down somewhere.
Get that calculator out. I'm just curious in general how engaged people are in primaries. Now, here we are talking for an hour about it because we think it's important. Listeners might be going, yeah, how does it affect me? Well, guess what? It does, right, Jesse?
Well, yeah, and
more so than national stuff a lot of the time.
Yeah, and at Santa Cruz Local, our kind of core is driving civic engagement, and it was really interesting. Sometimes we refer to the election and the election guide and everything as our Super Bowl because we put so much time into it. And not to get, be crass about analytics and page views, but we got a lot less interest in our election coverage across, we have our website, we have a Spanish language WhatsApp group for South County, we have our more like youth focused Instagram. And I think there was a lot of maybe apathy or burnout around elections in general, maybe related to kind of the weirdness at the state level, just like the intensity at the federal level. But I think a lot of people don't realize that, everybody in this town cares about something that's related to local politics. If you have a strong belief about what the city should be doing about homelessness, if you have a strong belief about the building that's going on next door, about bike lanes, what have you, like that is directly related to who you're choosing to lead the city. And not only that, but, these state level decisions, these federal level decisions, how we're going to implement them locally, how we're going to, people are talking about how are we going to soften the blow from some of these federal cuts. These are, huge, a huge responsibility we're putting on people. So, I try to tell people that, it does seem a little almost quaint, like who's going to be the mayor of our small city. But it's a big deal. And city council race is a big deal.
People in general recognize the importance of the midterm elections because it's been pretty well known from the moment Donald Trump was sworn in a second time that he had about 1 year to do his worst, because after that, his Republican pals start thinking about their own future and start speaking up and having a voice of their own. That appears to be what's happening now. So the importance of the midterm election is going to loom very, very, very large for voters this November, and I think it's going to result in a tremendous turnout. But you're right. As far as who's going to be the mayor, well, comes with, it's part of the election.
It's important. And I know that K-Squid listeners are probably a more engaged group than your average person walking down the street. So thank you for hanging with us during this discussion. My other theory about why maybe people didn't vote in as big numbers as we wish they would is I have a lot of friends who just say, I can't even look at a paper anymore. I'm tuned out of the news completely and just listening to music now. So there is that effect, I think, that the daily barrage of bad news when it comes to national news maybe have spilled over. I don't know what you think about that theory. I can't prove it. I'm just saying.
Well, I can't look at a newspaper these days either, but for a much different reason, that the print newspapers are hardly worth looking at anymore. But that's just me. I do read online, of course, New York Times, Washington Post, and all of our local, Santa Cruz Local and Lookout Santa Cruz. They're doing a fantastic job. But the print media, not so much. Now, we're just talking about Santa Cruz. We also need to consider South County, Santa Cruz, and Watsonville, because there was a big issue there. There is still a big issue, and that's the fire and battery storage. And that entered into a great deal of Glenn Church's support in the 2nd District in North Monterey County on the Monterey County Board of Supervisors, where he was running against Ramon Gomez, who was Felipe's chief of staff And Glenn has got 71% of the vote right now. He was pretty much the face of the fire for the the loyal opposition during that fire and keeping people aware of what was going on. In Santa Cruz County, the fire issue and the battery issue also spilled over when the issue of the new battery storage plant was being discussed. And excuse me, I've got somebody trying to call me. Undoubtedly, some late breaking news. Let me silence the phone and turn it back to
Okay,
you.
please do that. We only have a couple more minutes to go. So, Jesse, I'm going to go back to you with final thoughts because we are wrapping now.
Yeah, one thing I'll just touch on really briefly is that for the city council races, we didn't get into as much. Both of our incumbents have really comfortable leads. That's Scott Newsom and Renee Golder. Newsom, who represents downtown, a little closer with challenger Hector Marin, but it's not nearly so close as some of the other races we've been watching. And then the one other thing I want to mention is, we were talking about the November election and whether or not some of these races go to runoffs. We're going to have a lot going on locally in November. There's going to be a bunch of school board races, including Pajaro Valley Unified School District, which has been going through a lot of turmoil. There's going to be Watsonville City Council, Scotts Valley City Council, Capitola City Council. So there will be plenty of more time to exercise, your civic duty.
Thank you. And thank you to Tony Russomanno. That's all the time we have left today on Talk of the Bay. Coming up next, it's First Person Singular. I'm Rachel Ann.